Phil Danault is back in Montreal. Don't worry, I'm not going to eat this slice of pizza on the air.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Locked On Canadiens. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, for subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Really do love saying that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live NFL bets all season long. My name is Ian Boisvert, also known as @MaybeIt'sIan. I'm not joined by Laura Saba. She's currently traveling the world, so we're giving her a little bit of a break. So as I like to say, it's a fourth line shift episode. So we're gonna get the puck in deep. We're just gonna kill some clock until the star can get back to the show. Hey, look, we're gonna start not with the game. I know that this episode is coming out 2 days after the Canadiens finished their home and home with the Penguins. It's just a scheduling quirk here on the show, but we have bigger news. We have to talk about Phil Danault coming back to Montreal. We'll talk about the Penguins home and home, what we learned from Montreal and what we learned from Pittsburgh in those games. And then a quick weekly recap. We'll cover off on what was essentially a pretty positive week for the Canadiens, despite the fact that now they may be dealing with a couple of injuries, and we might not have a status on Sam Montembeault. So we'll get into those things throughout today's show. But let's start. Phil Danault is back in Montreal for the first time since the Stanley Cup Final. It's a trade that comes in about an hour before the holiday roster freeze on Friday evening. Montreal sends Columbus's second-round pick this year in 2026 for Phil Danault. No salary retained. I think that's why Montreal got such a good price, is they ate the entirety of that contract. There are some cap machinations here that are at play. I cannot even begin to tell you that I am smart enough to understand them. But look, Montreal essentially turns Jordan Harris, which I know is a wild name to bring up in talking about this, but they turned Jordan Harris into Patrick Laine and Phil Danault. If you look at the trade tree that brought them that pick. So in that respect, the asset management here from the Canadiens is very, very good. Phil Danault, before Saturday's game against the Penguins, where Montreal had Jake Evans healthy, he was probably going to slot in the bottom six somewhere. I know some people thought that maybe it's time to put Danault, to give the second line a legit center, but I don't think Kapanen is the problem with that line. I don't think there's any problem with that line really, other than the fact that they're just young. And I don't know, like putting a guy up there who has 6 points or whatever it is this year is the solution. Maybe they probably play better defensively, but I don't know that that's the solution. But before Evans got hurt, he was probably going to slot into that bottom six. He was probably going to play on the second penalty kill unit. And then Jake Evans goes down in the Pittsburgh game. We'll talk about that. And all of a sudden, we're kind of back where we were before the trade happened, which is maybe a glass half empty view of that. But the alternative is it's really scary to think what the Canadiens might look like today had they not made that trade, because they wouldn't have been able to go get external help, because as soon as that trade happened, an hour later, the holiday roster freeze hit, and the Canadiens and nobody else in the league for that matter could make any more external moves. They could not make a trade. Jake Evans goes down on Saturday night, and then all of a sudden you're kind of, you're going to have a hard time filling those minutes for, I think it's until the new year, I think is when the holiday roster freeze is undone. But certainly against Boston, you would be in a lot of trouble against a team that you are trying to hold off in the division. But so, I mean, it's fortuitous that the Canadiens got Danault when they did. Obviously, the goal here is for them to have a full complement of these players, to have Danault and Evans. But given where they are, and the fact that Evans is in fact injured, this is what they're going to have to play with. Now, as of this recording, Jake Evans was placed on IR on Sunday, I believe, which means he's really he's going to miss at least he missed the second Penguins game. He's going to miss the Bruins game tonight. I believe he's at least going to miss the game on the weekend, the 5 o'clock game on Sunday against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Then technically he would be eligible to come off of IR. And it is just a matter of how injured is he truly. I think the Canadiens putting Evans on IR was to free up a roster spot. Because think of it this way, right? I believe Montembeault still counted as a roster spot, despite the fact that he was on a conditioning loan. They had to call up Sammy Blais to play against Pittsburgh on Sunday. So there's an additional spot. And Phillip Danault was added to their roster count without subtracting anybody. They only traded a second-round pick. So the Canadiens got to the roster limit. That, I think, is at least right now, without knowing the severity of Jake Evans' injury, that's why he went on IR. I think they're trying to get more answers, but that from just a pure have to play at 23 or fewer on the roster count, that's why that made sense. So, I mean, look, I think going back to Danault as an addition here, I think this is a guy who really loved playing in Montreal, and I do think that there's a very good chance that coming back here and playing here again re-energizes him and makes him remember the player that he was. He didn't lose the defensive mojo with the Kings. He always had that. He probably always will. But maybe some of that offense comes back. Maybe playing with Brendan Gallagher again can bring some of that back from Phillip Danault. So that will be interesting to see. Where he slots in there. As far as changes to the rest of the lineup because of that, I don't necessarily know that there will be any. In the weekly recap, we'll cover off on potentially another injury to Joe Veleno that took place at the end of the Pittsburgh game, the Sunday Pittsburgh game. Pittsburgh just taking bodies on their way out. But look, this is a smart move for the Canadiens. This is exactly the kind of player the Canadiens need. I know people are going to go, well, they need a 2C. You could need more than one thing. You can need several different parts. Adding a 2C, of course, would be great. But I also want to keep reminding people who is available at 2C. What second line centers are just on the market right now? There aren't any. They would have traded by now. They would have been a second line center would have been moved to this point in the season should they be available. I think, again, we're still waiting for a lot of teams to fall out of playoff pictures. I'm very curious to see what happens with Buffalo now that they have canned Kevin Adams. They've hired Jarmo Kekalainen. And funny enough, for the purposes of this show, they've hired Marc Bergevin as well. I also find it funny that Marc Bergevin's one of his last moves in Montreal was running Phillip Danault out of town. And one of his last moves in LA was running Phillip Danault out of town. I find that to be, if Phillip Danault ends up in that market and he leaves, it's the canary in the coal mine that Bergevin is next. So Buffalo, maybe you want to sign Phil when the contract's up. I won't put that on you. But look, again, this is going to help the penalty kill, which has been better as of late. I don't think it's been quite the drag on the Canadiens that it has been. I think they've been playing more aggressively. I thought over the weekend, and we'll talk about it a little bit in the Penguins recaps, I thought that they did not look like they were afraid of the Penguins' power play, and maybe they should have been, considering the Penguins have one of the best power plays in the National Hockey League, if not the best. But he's going to undoubtedly help, especially when everyone is healthy. I think that is a big part of what is going to make this Canadiens team successful in the playoffs. You look at Phillip Danault and where his successes lie. It is playing against the top competition on the other team. Last year in the playoffs, he gets that matchup against Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. And yes, the Kings go on to lose that series again, but Phillip Danault had 8 points in 6 games while playing against that unit. I mean, that's the kind of guy that you want. You're looking at who potential matchups are in the playoffs, right? You're looking in the Atlantic. You're going to have to put somebody against Kucherov if you're playing against Tampa Bay. Who's it going to be? You have to put someone against Lucas Raymond if it's Detroit. Who's it going to be? So those are guys that you're going to need to be able to have. Montreal having 2 quasi shutdown centermen will help them in the long run. So I give the Canadiens a really strong grade on this trade. They didn't give up much. The salary cap, everyone stop white knuckling over the salary cap. It's not your money. It's not going to hurt them. They have a ton of money coming off the books next year. They'll be okay. I really just can't wait to see him again play in Montreal. He will likely be in the lineup on Tuesday when Montreal takes on the Boston Bruins. All right, let's leave that there. When we come back, let's talk about the weekend. The Montreal Canadiens played a back-to-back against the Pittsburgh Penguins, taking 3 of 4 points. And there was a lot of fun stuff that happened in those games. So we'll get into that in just a minute here on Locked On Canadiens. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch. The holidays are amazing, but they can also get overwhelming pretty fast. Travel, gifts, parties, year-end expenses. It's really easy to lose track of your money this time of year. And that's exactly why Monarch has become a game changer for me. If you want to keep your finances under control this holiday season, you need to be using Monarch. Rated Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025, Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, simple dashboard. The holiday spending category can become a lifesaver. You see exactly what's left in your gift and travel budget in real time. For me, it's always those stocking stuffers. You get a couple little things, and all of a sudden that really adds up. This is going to help you keep track of those sorts of things. Monarch makes money check-ins simple, just a minute or two each week, and you're completely up to speed. And it's great for couples. Shared dashboards, shared goals, and if you were, wait, how much did we spend? Conversations. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. All right. We are back. Thank you for making Locked On Canadiens your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Canadiens, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. An invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of the show. I am Discord literate, so come hang out. I'll be happy to hang out with you guys in the Discord, especially during games. I imagine it would be pretty fun to hang out. So go to lockedoncanadiens.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, look, the Canadiens finished their week with a back-to-back, home and home. So both teams traveled. Both teams played each other. No excuses for tired or anything like that. Both teams are equally tired. Let's start in the front half. Jacob Fowler makes his first Saturday night home appearance for the Montreal Canadiens, and he gets his first career shutout. Third youngest Canadiens goaltender to get his first shutout. Carey Price and Patrick Waugh ahead of him. I always kind of, with these sort of comparisons to like the other greats that have done these sorts of things, I always kind of wince my way through them. And the reason for that is back when Alex Galchenyuk was a rookie or young, and it was like every Habs stat for like top players, top scoring under the age of 24, it was like Hall of Famer, Hall of Famer, Hall of Famer, Alex Galchenyuk, Hall of Famer. And obviously we know how that turned out. So I always kind of wince and grit my teeth through those, but it's still very cool, right? For him to step into that spotlight. They were chanting his name. He said, he tries to be very humble, but he said like that could become a feeling he becomes addicted to. And I love that mentality from him, that he just wants to keep hearing those things, to keep the crowd happy. I also thought in that game, the Canadiens just front to back played a very strong game against a fragile opponent. The Pittsburgh Penguins have been really, really struggling as of late. I believe Sunday's win was their first since Evgeny Malkin got hurt. Look, I think, you look back at that game on Saturday against the Penguins, and obviously Fowler's shutout is the big one. But look, Montreal gets out to a great start in that game. Slafkovsky scores on the power play again. I thought Cole Caulfield had a great look on that. Owen Beck finally scores his first. And of course, he scores his first goal on a night where Jacob Fowler gets a shutout. If you remember, we talked about Carey Price's start being in Pittsburgh, and his first career game was also Kyle Chipchura's first career NHL game, and of course that has been overshadowed. I hope that does not happen to Owen Beck in this one. But in that game as well, Lane Hudson picks up his 100th point in game 119. I believe he's the fastest Canadiens defenseman to 100 points. He was the 11th fastest all-time in NHL history for a defenseman to score 100 points. That's the one when I talked about, the Alex Galchenyuk effect of it all. Hudson is the one where I go, yeah, he's just built different though. I'm always like, yeah, he's doing that because he's supposed to. That's never going to go away. He's always going to be able to do that. In that game too, Montreal, they don't give up anything on the power play, and they actually score a shorthanded goal. Josh Anderson scores a shorty on a breakaway. But ultimately, the Canadiens made a lot of big plays in that game. Fowler made a lot of big stops. He stops Raquel in the third period. The Penguins pulled their goalie with over 7 minutes to go. And I really thought that was a lot of good practice for the Canadiens defending their net. If you look at Money Puck after the game, it looks like Montreal ran up the expected goals, but because the Canadiens took like 6 shots at the empty net, and Money Puck was like, all of these should be goals. Why are they not going in? So that is a little misleading at the end of that game. But look, that was a fantastic one on Saturday night in Montreal. Sunday, they traveled to Pittsburgh. No Jake Evans. Obviously, he's banged up. He took a knee-on-knee in that Saturday game. That was incidental. There was nothing about that I thought, I think it was Justin Brazeau for the Penguins who bumped him. And it was just like, it just was 2 guys skating and they clacked knees together. Like, I don't have like a player safety rant to go on about that. It's just unfortunate. He went to the bench, left immediately, never came back. Still to this point, no update on Jake Evans. So we'll continue to wait for that feedback. So look, Montreal on Sunday, I thought that their first couple of shifts were strong. Then the Penguins kind of took the game over, and Montreal got the puck back and scored a tic-tac-toe goal from Demidov to Slafkovsky to Kapanen. Slafkovsky was phenomenal in this one. The Canadian second goal, Demidov, Slav again, cross ice pass, finds his guy who makes no mistake. The player Uri Slafkovsky is becoming right in front of our eyes is astonishing. This was always the value proposition when it came to why they took him over Shane Wright and why they took him over Logan Cooley, for example. It's because, and I've said it on this show before, those Shane Wright and Logan Cooley are excellent players in their own right. But you can find players of those archetypes. Logan Cooley is kind of an undersized, I think he's a center wing sort of player, very offensively minded. He's going to put up a bunch of points. He's going to be a fantastic player. Shane Wright, defensively responsible center who can also score. He's going to have a great career in his own right. But the rarer player is the guy with the little man's soft skills in the 6'4" frame. That is a harder player to find. So I constantly go back to that draft and I go, yes, like those two are going to be great players as well. But Slafkovsky, he's becoming the player the Canadiens thought they were picking, which is just a lot of these rebuilds don't work out if you don't hit on that player. And the Canadiens have hit on that player. They go to overtime in this game. Montreal had the puck the entire overtime. They hit 2 posts. Caulfield got robbed by Arthur Silovs. And they go to a shootout. Marty needs to stop going to Nick Suzuki in the shootout. I believe his last shootout goal was in December of 2023. He's 0 for his last 15. Texier, I don't mind shooting Texier in that situation. Leaving Demidov on the bench for a shootout, though, is crazy. Like, that needs to stop. I don't mean to be, everyone knows I love Marty. I defend him on the show constantly. This is an area where, like, a full point is on the line, and that's a big deal. And turning to a player who I know he's your captain, I know he's the guy you lean on in every situation. This doesn't need to be that situation. It's just not working there. Late in the third period, though, Veleno is pulled from the game by concussion spotters. We're assuming he went back to the bench after the Canadiens are coming in on a rush, and he's cutting across the faceoff dot, and St. Ivany for the Penguins just trucks him, just runs him over. And Craig Button on the TSN broadcast is saying, well, that it was incidental contact, except it wasn't. The Penguin skater was watching Veleno the whole time. Yes, Veleno is not aware that he's going to be hit because he doesn't have the puck. The whole thing with being aware of that you are eligible for contact is that you have to be eligible for contact. He was never at any point on that shift eligible to be hit. And it's not incidental contact when the guy who knocks the other guy over throws a shoulder into the upper part of his body. I was baffled by that. Montreal, their power play wasn't good in this game, but like you can't just level a guy like that. And again, it goes to it's going to go to the importance of Phil Danault in this next game as well. If Joe Veleno can't go against Boston, that's going to be really tough. And again, thank goodness the Canadiens are getting a guy like Phil Danault, because where else were they going to get this guy? Last thing I'll say, and it's a negative that I'm going to spin into a positive. The first line was completely non-existent in this game. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Zachary Bolduc, they were bad. They had a terrible night. Caulfield was trying a lot of stuff. The puck just was not cooperating with him. He had a turnover that led to the first goal for the Penguins. I'll spin this into a positive, because yes, that line was terrible, and yet the Canadiens still got a point and dominated overtime, and they hit the post twice, and they could have won that game. So if you're looking for any kind of silver lining out of the Canadiens having a really bad night from their top line, it's that it didn't sink them on merit. Like, it wasn't the thing that was like, well, the game's over in the first period because Nick and Cole don't have it. I think like you're not going to do that all the time, but the fact that the Canadiens were able to get offense from their second line and from their defense gave them a shot in this one. All right, we'll leave that there. When we come back, we'll look at the week as a whole. We'll talk about some of the positives of the week. And I do want to talk about Sam Montembeault, who is not yet returning to the Montreal Canadiens. And we'll get into that in just a minute here on Locked On Canadiens. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. The receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into all of those moments. Look, there's holiday games this week, so if you want to get in on some of that during the week, the live spreads and money lines will adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. All right, we are back. Let's talk about the week. 2-1-1 on the week for the Canadiens, so 5 out of 8 points, which is, last I checked, over 500 on the week. Even Gary Bettman's fake, faulty 500 that you get from all of these loser points. It started rough with that game against the Flyers. I thought the Canadiens played their second game against the Flyers just as they played the first. It was listless. It was not a particularly strong effort from those guys. And then they rebounded by beating up on two teams that they should absolutely beat up on, in the Blackhawks on Thursday and the Penguins on Saturday. I think Sunday was a mix of the Canadiens playing very sloppy throughout a lot of the game, but also the Penguins, for the most part, being tired of just being kicked around. And I think the Penguins had a lot of motivation to get Crosby those points on home ice. And I think that's why, the first period of that game, I think the Penguins had, let me check. The Penguins had 28 shots after the second period, 14 after the first. So they wanted it for Crosby. I saw a lot of people, being tough on Dobish after the Sunday game. I don't really understand that. He gave up three goals in regulation. The Penguins had over 30 shots, I believe. So 900 goaltending. I think I thought the third period Dobish quieted down. I know what people mean. He had a loud night. He's the contrast between him and Fowler and net, and we've talked about it on this show a lot, is stark, because Fowler plays like a starter, right? He plays a consistent, quiet type of game. Yes, he'll make the big athletic save when he needs to, but he's not Jakub Dobish, and I'm not saying he's this kind of player, but he plays like a Dominic Hasek would, and that he's just kind of flailing and throwing body parts at pucks, and it's constant chaos. Fowler's the opposite. So I definitely don't pin this one on Dobish, and I think it's odd that I think some people are. I think it takes a long time for hockey narratives to sort of dissipate. And I thought Dobich played well enough for the Canadiens to have won that game. The Canadiens in front of him didn't play well enough to win that game against Pittsburgh. I want to talk about Sam Montembeault because I know yesterday on Locked On Canadiens, my lovely co-host Laura had Dylan Waugh on to talk about goaltending. I think it's interesting that Sam Montembeault was supposed to rejoin the Canadiens in Pittsburgh. It's why they sent him to Laval to work with the Laval Rocket. He would finish up in Cleveland because that's where they were on their road trip, and then he would make his way to Pittsburgh. Except he's not rejoining the Canadiens in Boston. It's going to be Fowler against Boston on Tuesday night. And instead, Montembeault was sent back to Montreal to practice. And I am very concerned about where they think his game is. The first game for Montembeault in Laval was not good. He had a very bad save percentage. You saw a lot of the same mistakes where a puck was going one way and he was going the other, and it just hits the center of the net. Second game, they lose 2-0. He only gives up 1 goal. He had a much stronger game for the Laval Rocket. I'm very curious what is going on there. And I wonder how much of this is the fact that Fowler has given them reliable goaltending, that the Canadiens feel they are able to say, you know what, Sam, we're going to sit you a while. You're going to get this figured out. But to the point I mentioned, when he went on this conditioning stint to begin with, the whole point of that conditioning stint was not he was going to go down and fix all of his problems. It was he's going to feel the puck hit him in a live game environment, because the Canadiens don't feel that they can have him do that right now. The Canadiens they could have kept him on this conditioning stint. Now, I don't think Laval is playing a ton right now, which maybe is the defining factor in a lot of this. But, to bring him back to Montreal and say, you know what, you're not coming with the team, you're going to stay in Montreal and work on some stuff. I am just a little concerned about what the long-term future is for him in Montreal, because I think eventually it's reasonable to expect that Fowler runs into a bit of a wall. That's not to say I'm expecting the floor to completely fall out on that goalie, but just, you can't expect to lean on a rookie goalie forever. You know how I know that? We can't do that with his partner in Jakub Dobich, right? We need to give Dobich time in between starts. Dobich, if he has 3+ days in between starts, is an excellent goalie. He plays really well on rest. So, I almost wonder if there's a future where the Canadiens turn this back into a 3-headed goalie monster. And I know nobody wants to hear that, because last time it was super annoying when they did it. But I feel like we're headed in that direction, unless you come out of the holiday break and you can make a trade. And I just don't know that there's anybody who wants to take on Montembeault right now. And I also don't think the Canadiens make themselves better by trading him. If the Canadiens have any hope of being a playoff team and a playoff team that could win a round or two, it's with that guy in net. It's with Sam Montembeault in net. Maybe it's Fowler, but as of right now, I can't bring myself to think that is the plan. So that's something that we're gonna have to keep a close eye on. Look, tomorrow I'll have the breakdown of the Bruins game for you. There won't be a weekly recap. I believe the mailbag is cooked. Laura's got you for the end of the week. But my stars of the week this week, I'll do 3 stars. Third star, I'm going to give it to Kent Hughes. Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton for pulling off that Danault trade at the 11th hour. I think, he sort of, once the trade request got out from Danault, the Canadiens kind of had the Kings up against the wall. To get that done an hour before the deadline shows me that the Kings were really anxious to move on from that player. Think about it. If the Canadiens had lost Evans 2 days earlier, is that price higher because the Kings can squeeze more out of Jake Evans, out of the Canadiens? Maybe, but I'll give them the 3rd star. 2nd star, Slafkovsky, man. I'm falling in love with the player that this guy is becoming. Every game he's doing 1 or 2 things that we go, wow, I cannot believe he's already doing this. So continue to do that. He's proving that he can maybe not drive his own line, because he is playing with Ivan Demidov, and Kapanen is a great player in his own right as well. But maybe eventually Demidov goes up to that first line. You can put somebody else. Maybe Doc plays with Kapanen and Slafkovsky, or maybe it's the inverse and Doc goes up and you can still have Slafkovsky down on the second line. Either way, Slafkovsky has proven that he can be a play driver, which is huge for this team and how they construct their top six. And finally, I'm going to give my first star to Lane Hutson again. I just ever since the Ranger game, the line I used was he's on some video game stuff. He had a much quieter night the second game against Pittsburgh, but I thought him and Alex Carrier were fantastic defensively. I thought that they were very good at killing plays, which is something the Canadiens struggle at, and it's how they get into a lot of trouble in their own end. But I thought they were fantastic at killing plays and moving the puck up the ice. One of Alex Carrier's strongest games in a long time. But I think a lot of that is Hutson can fix whatever ails the guy next to him. It's really something special that he has there. All right, let's wrap it up there. Thanks for tuning into Locked On Canadiens today. Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Canadiens everywhere you get your podcasts. You get the latest episodes. It really does support us here on the show, so we thank you for doing so. You can find me at Maybe It's Ian. You can find the show Locked On Canadiens everywhere we're posting things. Locked On Canadiens on Blue Sky, TikTok, and Instagram. LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com is the best way to send in your mailbag questions. And hey, if you need a last-minute holiday gift or someone keeps asking what you want, make it easy. Ask for the Everydayer Club. Ad-free episodes of this show, exclusive Discord server access, and more. Subscriptions can be gifted through LockedOnCanadiens.supercast.com. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure you make your second listen Locked On NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow after the Bruins game.